Welcome back. In today's video, we're going to learn about Apple's StoreKit framework, and in particular, we're going to learn about how we can provide in-app purchase capabilities to our SwiftUI apps using this framework. So without any further ado, let's get started. So what is StoreKit? StoreKit is Apple's framework to support in-app purchases and interactions with the App Store. Now, we're not limited to only in-app purchases, but we can also use it to check a user's Apple Music capabilities and offer special subscriptions. Furthermore, we can use it to provide recommendations for third-party content and enable users to rate and review your app. So first of all, let's talk about how in-app purchasing worked in iOS until now. Now, the first thing we had to do was we had to sign in into App Store Connect. Now, this requires a paid developer account. And once we're logged in, we have to register our app. So if we had some kind of recipe app, we would call it recipe app. And we would also give it a specific bundle ID, which would be equivalent to the bundle ID that you have in your Xcode project file. Now, once we register our app, we can start defining in-app purchases. So we could have something like unlock recipe or remove all ads. And once we define these, we have to also create the so-called sandbox account. And the reason why we need them is you obviously do not want to use your real Apple account to test these purchases. So whenever you're using the sandbox account, you're not really purchasing against the real environment, but more against the sandbox environment. And after you're done with all of these steps, you can finally start coding in Xcode. However, things changed a bit with WWDC 2020. So the way it works now is you go into Xcode and create a StoreKit configuration file, and you can already start coding and testing purchases. Now, you still have to go through App Store Connect to go live with your app. However, using this configuration file, you can start much earlier with the development of these in-app features without really relying on having a paid developer account or having to log in into App Store Connect every time you want to add an additional in-app purchase item. Now, let's talk about different types of in-app purchases. Now, Apple distinguishes between three types. One of them is called consumable, and as the name suggests, these are items that are consumable. So if you had a game where a user can buy 2,000 coins, it's not something he just does once, but he can consume these 2,000 coins and he can purchase it again and again whenever he needs to. Now, the opposite of this would be the non-consumable. Now, you could have something like the feature to remove ads forever from your app. And this is a one-time purchase that is not consumable. And then there are also auto-renewing subscriptions. Think of a gym subscription or your Netflix subscription. Those are things where you demand the user to pay, for example, monthly or yearly. So let's talk about how the whole thing works. Now, to give you a rough idea of what's happening, here on the left you have your app and on the right you have the App Store. And the communication between your app and the App Store happens through the StoreKit framework. So let's have a closer look into how this really works. Now, this is from the developer documentation, and I think it really describes well how the flow kind of works. So initially, when you want to retrieve product information, your app makes a product request to the App Store through the framework, and the App Store then can provide us with product information. Now remember, the App Store knows it because we provided these product information through the App Store Connect. Now, for testing purposes, it obviously wouldn't connect to the App Store because it would just simply read it from the StoreKit configuration file. But nevertheless, when you want to go public, sooner or later, you have to provide these informations through App Store Connect. So once your app gets back that information, it is responsible to display the Store UI. Now, the second phase would be the requesting of the payment. So if the user selects a product and makes a payment request, it goes through the framework, and then in the App Store, the actual payment is processed. And once the payment is processed, independently of whether it was successful or not successful, an observer is called in your app, and you know exactly if that purchase was successful and can deliver the product or not, depending on the result. Now, in our demo app that we are going to create now, we will start using the configuration file, and later on we will move to App Store Connect and load the product information directly through the App Store as well. Now the demo app we're going to build is going to look like as follows. So we will have a basic recipe store app where the user can unlock a particular recipe. So if I wanted to unlock the berry blue recipe, I would simply select it. And then I get the in-app purchase preview where I can confirm my purchase. And by pressing confirm, I will get an alert that everything was set. And I will also see that the environment that is currently used is the Xcode environment. And that is because we're using the StoreKit configuration file and we're not really connecting to the real environment yet. So if I press OK, you will see the recipe was unlocked, and now I can select it and see the recipe behind it. So without any further ado, let's get straight into it. Alright, open up Xcode, create a new project, make sure you select the app as your template, press next and give it a name. I will call mine recipe store, and also make sure that the interface is selected SwiftUI, the lifecycle to SwiftUI App, and the language to Swift. Press next and save it somewhere you like. Now also make sure that you select the iPhone 11 as your simulator. Alright, so the first thing we're going to do is we're going to create this StoreKit configuration file, and the way we do that is by going into File, New File, and we will go down all the way to Other, and there we will find the StoreKit configuration file. Now you can rename it if you like, but I will just leave it to configuration and press create. And here's our configuration file. Now within our configuration file, we can declare our in-app purchases by pressing this plus button down here. Now when we press this button, we have the option to choose between the 3 types of in-app purchases. And in this tutorial, we will mostly focus on non-consumable in-app purchases. So once I create one, I get this entry here and I can give it a name. So I will call the first one berry blue. And I also have to give it a product ID. And a good practice to name these is to use your project bundle identifier. And I will just simply copy this one and paste this in here. Afterwards, I'm going to add a dot and call this one berry blue. Now we can also define the price for this one, but I will just leave it to 99 cents. And we have to also give it some localization, name and description. So I will call this one berry blue as well. And the description could be something like very filling and refreshing. Alright, now let's also create another one. It's going to be also non-consumable, and the product ID will be very similar. However, the last part will be different. Now in this case, we're going to have a lemon berry, so I will say lemon berry. Make sure you also set the reference name. And similarly to the previous one, we have to also provide localization, so I will say lemon berry, and the description. Next, we have to create a store class that takes care of retrieving information from this configuration StoreKit file, or later on even communicate with the App Store. And the way we do that is we create a new file, and it's going to be a Swift file, and I will simply call this one store. Now in here we do not need foundation, but we need StoreKit. So we'll replace this with StoreKit like so, and we will define our store class as follows. It will inherit from NS object, and it will also conform to observable object. Now in here we will also have a property that keeps track of all the product identifiers. So I will create a private constant and call it all product identifiers. And it's going to be a set of strings. And the product identifiers we can simply read off from the StoreKit configuration file. So we have one for blueberry, and similarly we have one for lemonberry. Actually, I just noticed it's not really consistent with the naming for the berry blue. So let me rename this one as follows. And go into the store and rename it here as well. And then we will copy the one from the lemonberry as well and paste it in here like so. Now to fetch the actual products, we will have to use one of the StoreKit's delegates, and the one we need is called StoreKit products request delegate. So let me create an extension for this. It's going to be StoreKit products request delegate. Now Xcode will complain that we're not conforming to this delegate yet, so we can simply press fix and get the method that is required. So in this case, the did receive method when products are requested. So once we're in here, we can access the loaded products as follows. So we can say loaded products is equal to response.products. And similarly, we can also access invalid products that may be the result of invalid product identifiers. So we can say let invalid products be equal to response.invalid product identifiers. Now in here we're going to check if there are loaded products, so whether it is not empty, and if it is empty we're going to print the following statement: could not load the products, and then return. Actually, let's also check if we have invalid products. So if we have invalid products, we will also print invalid products found, and also try to print these if possible. Now there are two things we have to still do. We have to cache the fetched products, and then we have to notify anyone waiting on the product load. So basically, if we have a SwiftUI view and we're accessing the store's products, so we're fetching the products, we also want to get notified when the product load is done. Now let's start with the caching, and for that I'm simply going to create a new variable. It's going to be a private variable called fetched products, and in here we're going to have an array of StoreKit products like so. And then we go down here and set the fetched products to our loaded products. Now to update anyone waiting on the product load, so as I mentioned earlier, this will probably happen on the view layer. So we always want to update the view on the main queue. So I will first create this dispatch queue.main.async code. And in here I will start with the notifying of the product load. And the way we're going to do it is by using completion handlers. So let me create another private variable in here, and it's going to be fetch completion handler, and it will be of the following type. So we get an array of StoreKit products, and it doesn't return anything, so we say void, and it's going to be optional. Now we can go down here again and simply say self.fetch completion handler and pass in the array of loaded products. However, after we did this, we have to make sure that we clean up our completion handler for the next use. So we will also have to say fetch completion handler is going to be equal to nil. Now this delegate method will not be called yet because we haven't said anything's delegate yet. So let's fix that quickly. Now the way we're going to do that is we will create another private variable, and it's going to be a products request, which is of type StoreKit products request. And it will be optional, and we will also have a method where this products request is initialized. Now for this I will create a private method, and I will call this one fetch products. Now remember, when we fetch products we have this completion handler where we pass in our loaded products. And it would be nice if we can basically define what will happen with these products that we get from this completion handler when we call this fetch products. And to do that, we can simply do the following. So it will also take a completion handler, and it's going to be an escaping closure, and it's going to be of the following type. And I don't really want to type this out again, so I will create a type alias for this. I will simply say type alias fetch completion handler is going to be equal to the following, and then we can simply use this in here, and we can also use it in here as well. Let me fix this quickly. All right. Now the first thing we have to check is that there is no products request set yet. So we have to make sure that it is nil. So let me do that within God statement. So I will say God self products request is equal to nil, else we will simply return. And then in here, I can also set the fetch completion handler. Remember, this one is called within the delegate and set here. So I will basically define what will happen afterwards. And I will set it to the completion that we get passed through the method in here. And then I can start initializing this products request. So I will say products request is equal to StoreKit products request. And it will need product identifiers, and we have just defined them up here. So I will just pass it in here like so. And then we have to make sure that we set its delegate to self, because otherwise this is never called. And once we did that, all we have to do is call start, which sends the request to the Apple App Store. And with that, we're all set. Now we're setting the products request here, but we're never really setting the products request to nil. So once this products request is called, we have to make sure that we set the products request to nil, similar to how we did it with the fetch completion handler. So I will simply say self.products request is equal to nil. And I will also have to do that in case we have an error. However, we do not need the self keyword in here. Now let's check out and see if our fetching actually works. So to test it, we have to make use of the store class. And back then with UIKit, the way we did that was by using the singleton pattern. So we had a shared instance of it, and we would pass it around. However, in SwiftUI, we do it a bit differently. The way we do that is by going into our app file, and in here we will create our state object as follows. It's going to be a private variable called store, and we will initialize it in here. And what we will do here is to the main view in our window group, we will set the environment object, and we will pass in the store so that every child from this content view can access this store as well. Now to access the store in the content view, we have to also use a property wrapper. In this case, we have to use the environment object property wrapper, and we will declare a private variable called store of type store. Now to see if the fetching works, I will go into my store class, and in here I already created this initializer in here. So I overriding the initializer, I'm calling this super init because I'm conforming to the NS object. So I want to do all of that first, and then I will do my own thing. So I will say fetch products. And remember, here we can pass whatever happens after this completion handler. So if I press the return key here, I will get access to all of the products. So let me rename this to products. And in here, I will simply print the products. Now, if we run this, you will see that it's running, but you do not really see anything in here. And that is because to access this configuration StoreKit file, you have to make sure that you edit the scheme. So the way you do that is by selecting it and then going to edit scheme. And then you go to options, and down here you will see the StoreKit configuration. And in this drop down, you should see your configuration file. Now for me, it's this configuration.storekit file. I will just simply select it and press close and then run again. And this time you will get the array of all our products. Perfect. Let's go back to our store class. Now, before we get to the UI, let's also do the transaction logic. So right in here, I will first of all create a private function called start observing the payment queue. And the way you do that is by simply saying StoreKit payment queue dot default, and then add self as the StoreKit payment. Now Xcode will complain here because our store class doesn't fulfill the requirements yet to be a payment transaction observer. But before we fix that, let me make sure that I call this in the initializer like so. All right, and the way we fix that is by simply creating another extension. And this time it's going to be the StoreKit payment transaction observer. And I will let Xcode give me the mandatory methods for this one. And in this case, it's just one, which is the updated transaction method. And in here, we will actually be able to observe every state of the transaction. So let me show you what I mean. So what we can do in here is, since the transactions is an array, we can say for each of these transactions in transactions, we are going to switch on the transaction transaction state, and Xcode will help us giving the missing cases. And here you can see the cases. As you can see, there's a state for purchasing, purchased, failed, restored, and deferred. Now the logic for purchased and restored will be very similar, so I can actually just remove this case and move this up here. And the logic for purchasing and deferred will be also very similar. So let me just move this as well and move it down here. And for purchasing and deferred, it's going to be very simple. We're just going to break for now. Now for purchased and restored, we want to keep track of the purchases. So we have to somehow have an array of all these purchases that were made or restored. And for that, I will have to create another variable. And I will create a private variable in here called completed purchases. And it's going to be an array of strings, like so. And then we can scroll down again, and in the case for purchased and restored, we can simply append it to the array by appending the transaction.payment.product identifier, which is a string. Now we also have to keep track of whether we should finish the transaction. So if we're in the state of purchase, restored, or even failed, we want to finish the transaction. For the other cases, we do not want to finish the transaction. So let me create a variable in here called should finish transactions. And I will set it to false initially. And then when I'm in this state, I will set it to true. Similarly, I will set it to true when I'm in failed. However, in this case, it will simply use the default, which is false. And we have to also make sure that we type break in here. Now, if one of these transactions in this transactions array should be finished, we will do the following. So let me first check it. We will call StoreKit payment queue dot default dot finish transaction, and simply pass in the transaction that we are looking into right now. Now, similar to the fetch completion handler, we also want a purchase completion handler to get notified when a purchase was completed. So similarly, we will do it in the dispatch queue. However, we haven't created our purchase completion handler, so let me go up here to the spot where we had our fetch completion handler. And actually it makes sense to create a type alias for it as well. So I declare it down here as follows, and it's going to be StoreKit payment transaction, which is going to be of type optional, and it will return void. Now let me copy this and declare our variable which contains this completion handler. It's going to be also private, and I will call this one purchase completion handler. It's going to be of the following type, also optional. Now we can go down here to our implementation, and in here simply call self.purchaseCompletionHandler and simply pass in the transaction. Now, since this is an optional, we have to also add the question mark here. Now, once we did that, we have to also clean it up. So I have to set it to nil right afterwards. Now let's also create a function that, similarly to the fetch products, takes care of the purchasing. So I will create a function called buy, which takes a product of type StoreKit product and an escaping completion handler of type purchase completion handler. And in here we will set the variable of our completion handler to the completion handler that we get passed in the function, like so. And then we also have to make sure that we define the payment, and we can simply access it by saying StoreKit payment with the product. And the last thing we have to do in here is say StoreKit payment queue.default.add payment, and we just pass in the payment we just declared here. Now the completion handler is something that is not really relevant for the public API. So I will create another function. Actually, let me create an extension for that. And it's going to be a public function called purchase product. And here we will just take the product as the argument. And the first thing we will do in here is start observing the payment queue. And in here I will call buy and pass in the product. Now we could declare a completion handler and we could actually check the transaction state and do some more stuff in here if we wanted to. But for now I will just leave this one empty. Now we also have to keep track of all the unlocked recipes. And for that I will create an array up here, and we have to make sure that it has the add published property wrapper. And I will call this one unlocked recipes, and it's going to be an array of recipes. Now we haven't declared this yet, so let me create another model file, and I will call this one recipe. Now in here I will create a struct called recipe. It's going to be hashable, and it will have an ID, a title, a description, and we also want to keep track if the recipe is still locked, so we will have a boolean for this. And the price is going to be an optional string, because it could happen that it is unlocked, and if it's unlocked we don't want to show the price. That's why I decided to make this optional. We also need to make sure that we store it locally, because we have to know whether it's in euro or US dollar. And lastly we want to store the image name, which is going to be a string. Now, the way we're going to initialize it is we will initialize them in our store, and for that we will get a product, which is going to be of type StoreKit product. And we will also note whether it is locked or not. And I will set the default value to true. Now it doesn't know StoreKit product yet, so let me import it here. Alright, and now I can start defining these. So I will say self.id is equal to the product identifier, and the title is going to be equal to the product.localized title. Similarly, the description, I set it to the product.localized description, and self is locked is going to be whatever we get passed in here. Lastly, we have to set the locally to product.price locally. Now, if it is locked, We will set the price. And remember, the price is a string, so we also need some formatter for this. So let me create a formatter in here. I will make this one a lazy variable called formatter. It's going to be a number formatter. And in here I will define the number formatter like so. And I will have to set the number style to currency and locally. Lastly, we have to make sure that we return it, and then we can use it in here as follows. So we say formatter.string from the product.price, which is an NS decimal number. Now I think we forgot to initialize the image name. So let me go down here and also initialize it as well. And the way I'm going to define these image file names is based on their product identifier. So I will set it to the product identifier as well. Now to initialize these, we go back to the store. And actually, since we also keep track of the log state inside of the recipe, it makes more sense to name it to something like all recipes. And we will set the recipes after we fetch the products. So what we will say is self.allRecipes is equal to products.map. Now here we get a StoreKit product, and we will map it to a recipe. So we will use the initializer, which takes the StoreKit product. And whenever a purchase is completed, we have to make sure that we update this array so that we unlock the ones that were actually purchased. So I will do the following. I will create a did set in here. Now, whenever this changed, we will do something that may change the UI. So we will have to do this in the main queue. And in here, I will also check that we are fine to access self in here. And then in here, I will iterate through the recipes. So I will say for index in self.allRecipes.indices. Now we will access the recipe at that particular index, like so. And then we will define its locked state, which is going to be equal to whether the completed purchases array contains the ID, so the product identifier. And remember, we define it to be the ID, so we can say self.allRecipes at that particular index .id, and that will make sure that the lock state is set accordingly. Oh, and obviously this only makes sense if we make sure that this is a weak self. Now, this is pretty much all we have to do for the store. Now we can start with the UI. So I will go back to the content view. And what I basically want here is a list of all products. So before we get to the list, let me first declare a view for the individual rows. So I will define a recipe row view like so. And it will take a recipe and an action that we will need. And the action is used when the row is tapped. So in here, we also need to declare the body like so. And our body is going to be a horizontal stack. And inside of that horizontal stack, we will have a Z stack. And then we will set the image. And the image is going to be the recipe.image name. And we also have to apply some modifiers to it. So first of all, I will make it resizable. I will set the aspect ratio to fill. I will set the frame to a width of 80 and a height of 80. I set the corner radius to 9. The opacity depends on the state of whether it is locked or not. So if it is locked, I want it to be 0.8, else fully visible, so 1. And I will also add the blur with a similar logic. So I will check if it's locked. And if that is the case, I will set it to 3, otherwise to 0. And I will set a padding here as well. Let me make some room here. And make sure that you add the dot here. Now on top of that image, I will have this lock whenever the recipe is still locked. So I will have another image here, and it's going to be the system image called lock.fill. And the font is going to be a large title, and the opacity is going to also depend on the state whether it is locked. So if it is locked, we want to show it, otherwise we do not want to show it. Now after that Z stack, we will have a V stack, and I will also make sure that it has the leading alignment. And then I will set the recipe.title in here and the font to title for the description, and it will have a slightly smaller font, so I will use the caption font. And then we will have a spacer after the V stack, and then we will check if the price exists. If the price exists, we will also have a small badge indicating the price, and also whether the recipe is locked, because it obviously only makes sense to show the price if it is locked. And if that is the case, we can have a button, and the button is going to be the action that we just declared up here. So when we initialize it, we provide the code for the action. And besides that, we will also have a label, and the label is going to be a text, and it will be the price. Or it should be labeled with 1L instead of 2. Now let's also add some modifiers here so it looks nice. I will set the foreground color to white, and I will set a padding. Now you can play around with these, and the padding will only be applied to the leading and trailing edges. And I want to have also a padding at the top and bottom. Actually, we could just move it in here like so. And then we will also have a background, and the corner radius is going to be 25, so it's going to be really round. Now back in our content view, we will replace the basic hello world stuff and use a navigation view instead. Inside of this navigation view, we will have a list, and we can access all our recipes like so. We have to make sure that we provide an identifier. Inside of this closure, we will get a recipe, and we can do the following. So I will create a group because I will have a condition here. So first of all, if the recipe is not locked, we will do the following. I will have a navigation link. Let me pick the one that has the destination as the first thing. And the destination for now, I will just set it to a text, which contains the text secret recipe. And the label is going to be a view. So what we can do is remove this. And then in here we will use the recipe row, which we just declared, and it will need a recipe, and the recipe is going to one that we are iterating over right now. And the action is going to be store.purchase product, and here we have to provide the StoreKit product. However, our recipe is not really a StoreKit product, it is recipe, right? Now what we do have is the identifier, so I will just create an API in the store that basically lets us access this through the ID. So down here where I have the public function, I will create another function called product for identifier, which will take a string and return an optional StoreKit product, because it could happen that the product for a specific identifier does not exist. Now here I will simply return the fetched products that first where the following holds. We want to make sure that the item's product identifier is equal to the identifier that is passed in here. Now we can go back to the content view and do the following. So let me first remove this and close this so we have a bit more room. And in here I will check if the product exists. So I will say if product is equal to store.product for the product identifier, which is equivalent to the recipe ID. I will simply set the store.purchase product And if the product exists, I will simply call store.purchaseProduct with that product, like so. Now this is the case when it's locked. Now if it is not locked, we will do something else. We will just provide a recipe row here. Also with the recipe, and actually the action doesn't really matter here, because when it is not locked, we will have the navigation link. So the user will select this row and then he will be directly navigated here, and this action should be ignored. So at this point, it doesn't really matter. So I could do something like this, and then in here, I will do the thing that we had up here, because here it really matters. In this case, it is locked, and if the user taps on it, he should be able to purchase it. Actually, this doesn't make sense, so it's enough to just have it like so. Now, lastly, I want to set the navigation bar title, and I do this on the group. So I will say navigation title, and I will set it to recipe store. Now let me run this and see what we got so far. All right, so we don't see the images yet, but because we obviously didn't add any images yet. However, if we try to tap on one of these, we get this in-app purchase confirmation screen. And if I press confirm, I get this alert. And if I press OK, you can see that the lock was disabled, and we can actually move to the next screen. So that works pretty much just like as we expected. Now there are a few small things that I would like to fix. For example, here it seems like we have too much padding at the top and bottom. So what I will do is I will just remove this down, and then I will say add a padding to the top and bottom, but with only 5 as the value. And if I run it again, it looks much nicer. Now let's fix the issue with the images. Now I have this folder with my images, and what I have to do now is go into my assets catalog and then put these images in there. I have to also rename them based on the product identifier in my configuration file. So I will just copy this and rename it like so. And similarly, I will do it for the lemon berry. Just copy it and rename it here as well. Now let me run and see if that already fixes our issue. Yep, there they are. Now you can see the images here as well. Well, let me try and see if the blurring and unblurring works as well. As you can see, it still works. However, there's an issue with the navigation tile we will have to look into. And the issue with the navigation tile is that we are on the wrong level. So if we just move it one down and run it again, it should keep the navigation tile where it is. So let me try it again. And the navigation tile is still there and everything works as expected. Awesome. Now I would also like to provide an option to restore purchases. So I will go back into my store class and create a function called restore purchases. Like so, and in here I will simply call StoreKit payment queue default.restore completed transactions. And I can call this one in my content view. So I just copy this, and then the way I'm going to make it accessible is through a navigation bar button. So let me create some navigation bar items at the trailing location, and we want to have a button with the title restore, and the action is going to be store.restore purchases. Now let me try and run this. Now our list looks a bit weird because we have to make sure that we provide this navigation bar items to the group. So I will put it one layer above like so and run again, and our list looks normal again. Now the restore button would work. However, we are working with the configuration file, And whenever we do that, it's not really restoring anything here. However, as I told you, the way you should do it when you want your app to go public is through the App Store Connect. So let me also show you how it works there. Alright, now this part of the tutorial was recorded much later, and I also updated to the new macOS. That's why the UI looks a bit different. However, it should still work pretty much the same for you. Now, so far we're loading our in-app purchases from this configuration file. However, now we want to load it straight from the App Store Connect. So what we have to do is we have to select on the current scheme and then choose Edit Scheme. And once you go here to Run and Options, you should see your StoreKit configuration, and here you want to choose None, because once you do None, it will really try to connect to the App Store Connect and see if you have defined the in-app purchases there. So press Close and open up your browser and navigate to the page called appstoreconnect.apple.com. Now, once you're on this site, you have to log in. Once again, this requires that you have a paid Apple developer account. So I will log in with mine. All right, now, once you're logged in, you will see the following dashboard. And the first thing you want to do here is you want to go to Agreements, Tax, and Banking. And you want to make sure that the status here is set active for both of these agreement types. And if that is not the case, you want to press View and make sure that you agree the new contracts. Similarly, you want to go through all the other tabs and make sure that everything is fine. And lastly, also make sure that you provide a banking account, because otherwise in-app purchasing may not work for you. Now go back to the dashboard by selecting the logo. And now we want to choose My App. Now, if you already created some apps, you will see them here. If this is the first app you're creating, your screen will look as follows. And what you want to do is you want to press this plus icon here and choose New App. And before you start filling these things, what you have to do is you have to create a new bundle ID. And the way you do that is by going to the Apple developer account and then to this location. However, you can simply right click here and select Open Link in New Tab. And theoretically, you should be able to do it here. However, there are some issues, and the way we're going to fix it is by pressing this all identifiers button. And once we're in here, we're going to press this plus icon here for identifiers. We want to register a new identifier. It's going to be an app ID. Press continue. Make sure you choose app and continue. And here you can provide some description. I will just write our recipe app, and the bundle ID, as I mentioned earlier, has to be equivalent to the bundle identifier that is defined in your Xcode project. So I will just create one and call this one, copy this and press continue and register. All right, now that identifier was created, and I want to go back to our Xcode project, and you want to go to your Xcode project file. And here under bundle identifier, you will use the new bundle identifier that we just created. Now, the reason why I created a new one and not just copied the one from Xcode over there is because the previous one I already used. However, you could just do it the other way. Just take the bundle ID from your Xcode project and move it over to the App Store Connect. Now, once we're done with this, we can go back to our App Store Connect. And we want to refresh the page, and we want to press this plus icon again, create a new app. We want to choose iOS. We have to give it a name. I will call this one my recipe app. Now for the primary language, I'm going to choose English, and the bundle ID you should be able to find in here. Now you also have to provide this SKU, which is a unique ID for your app. What you can do is simply use this bundle identifier because it's already pretty unique. And you want to make sure that the user access is set to full access and choose create. All right, I guess you cannot use this name. So let me try something else and press create. All right, this worked and we got straight into the app. Now to define our in-app purchases, we will go down here to in-app purchases and then manage. And here we want to press this plus icon, and we're mostly interested in non-consumable products, so I will create one by selecting it. And the reference ID and product ID you can simply copy from your configuration StoreKit file. Similarly, you can also copy these localization strings, and I already did that. So it will look like this. You will have this reference name, product ID, and you will be able to choose the pricing from here. And down here, you will provide these localization information as well. The other things are optional, and you can already press save. Now, this won't work for me because I already used this product ID, just like I used the bundle ID again. However, what we can do is we can simply rename this as follows and then save it. However, you probably do not have to do that. And what I will simply do is rename it here. And remember, we have to also rename it here as well, where we have our product identifiers defined. All right, now lastly, what you have to do is you have to go to your Xcode project file, and you have to make sure that you sign it. So press on automatically manage signing, and also choose a team. Now, I already added this in-app purchase capabilities, but you have to also do it by pressing this plus icon here. And then you should be able to find in-app purchases in here. And by simply double tapping it, you will have it here visible as well. Now, you won't be able to test this on a simulator. You have to run it on a real device. And once you run it on a real device and try to make a purchase, it will try to use your private account. However, what you want to do is you want to use the sandbox account. And for that, we have to first create a sandbox account. So let me show you how you can create your sandbox account. Now for this, you want to go back to the dashboard. So select this logo here for the App Store Connect. And at the bottom left, you want to select users and access. And down here, you should see sandbox and then testers. And here I already created a sandbox account. Obviously this doesn't exist, it doesn't have to exist. And the way you create one is by pressing this plus icon, and then you can fill it with some basic information. And after that, you can directly start using it to log in and make an in-app purchase without actually having to pay for it. All right, now this is really all I wanted to show you in this tutorial. It is quite a long tutorial, but I hope you learned a lot about in-app purchases and how it works. And if you have any questions, make sure you use the comments section and I will try to answer as fast as possible. And as always, make sure you subscribe to the channel so you get notified when new content arrives. And I will see you in the next tutorial. Thank you for watching.